All right, so tonight I wanted to talk about understanding the spiritual ego. And this is an idea that Matt Kahn talks about a lot, and Alan Watts talks about it too in his own way. And the idea is that, so when I use the word ego here, I'm talking about the tendency of our minds to try to create and identify, to define ourselves, to create identity about ourselves, to define ourselves, to come up with a concrete explanation of who we are and what we mean, where we fit in the world, how we relate to others, how we relate to our various social environments, how we relate to our family or tribe, whatever groups we're a part of. And so we all have this tendency within us. It's what our ego evolved to do. It's what our mind evolved to do, because as we started evolving into tribal animals, we started living in groups, we needed to know where we fit in relation to other people. We needed to know how to interact, how to relate to these other people in our tribe, because especially early in our evolution, we depended on other people in our tribe for survival. So the ego evolved as a necessary mechanism to define ourselves so that we can tell other people who we are and tell other people how we fit into the tribe. So we all have this natural tendency to define ourselves, to create an identity. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with knowing who we are. But this tendency of the ego to create an identity and cling to it can cause problems when we come up with an idealized projection of this identity, and we develop expectations for how this entity should be, or how this identity should be, whether it's expectations about ourselves, expectations about our circumstances, expectations about other people in our lives. So it's when we start developing these expectations out of our identity, and then if reality doesn't live up to these expectations, that's when we start to get upset. We start to get disappointed. We start to suffer if we have expectations of how things are supposed to be, but reality is not matching those expectations. And so everyone here is probably aware of this happening in a materialistic sense. So if you're here listening to this talk, you probably have some spiritual awareness, and spirituality, or even self-analysis, therapy, any kind of spiritual path or healing journey or self-discovery journey, all of these modalities can help us to break out of the materialistic ego. So an ego based on an identity of materialistic things like our job, our house, our family, the clothes we wear, the car we drive. So we're all pretty aware of those materialistic ego identities, and things like meditation or therapy or self-help groups can help us break out of those materialistic egos and those materialistic identities. However, the ego is a shifty little shifty little thing, and it adapts. So when we break out of the materialistic ego, pretty quickly it starts forming a new ego around whatever new surroundings we're in, whatever new spiritual teachings we're involved with. And a spiritual ego can easily develop to take the place in the materialistic ego. So things like we can identify with studying with a particular guru, or identify as practicing a particular meditation technique. Or even in healing journeys, we might start to identify as a person with this particular wound, in particular, this person with this kind of trauma. And so whatever kind of healing or self-discovery path we're on, the ego is going to look for a way to develop a new identity around whatever new environments we're in. And it can start to create new expectations around this new spiritual ego. So I know for me, when I started studying with my meditation teacher, I started to develop expectations around enlightenment and having ideas like, oh, once I'm finally enlightened, then I'll be happy. Everything will be okay. Everything will be complete. I'll know where I am in the world. And, expectations can develop around healing. Like once I'm finally healed, once I heal this wound, once I process all these repressed emotions, then I'll finally be happy. Then I can be complete. Then I can get on with my life. And so the same kind of expectations can develop out of the very beneficial and useful things of spirituality or therapy or self-discovery. And so it's just always good to keep in mind that self-discovery is good, growth is good, healing is good. These are all good and beautiful things. But we have to always be aware of creating a new goal, a new expectation out of these things, out of these growth things, out of self-discovery, because it can very easily become just the next trap, the next unobtainable thing that we need in order to be happy, but it's always out of grasp. And so it's important to take time to appreciate ourselves as we are now, to try to accept ourselves as we are. And a lot of the traditional spiritual paths focus heavily on that acceptance part, accepting our lives as they are, accepting ourselves as we are. And that's all well and good, but the fact of the matter is sometimes it's easier to accept ourselves after we heal ourselves a little bit, or it can be easier to accept ourselves after we grow a little bit. So there's can be a constant balance here, a constant interplay. It's good to try to improve ourselves, try to become the people that we want to be. But at the same time, we need to make sure we celebrate ourselves exactly as we are and where we are on our journey, where we are on our path. Because we're never going to get to the end of the path. There is no end. There's no end to the journey. There's no end to the healing journey. There's no end to the spiritual path. It always keeps going. And if we're waiting for the end, if we're waiting for the destination, then we're always going to be waiting to start our lives. We're always going to be waiting to be happy, always be waiting to be complete. And so it's just always, I like to think about it as coming at it from both ends. We can try to improve ourselves and try to improve our lives to a point that's easier to accept. But at the same time, we can also work on accepting things as they are. And coming at it from both ends, we can try to find some happy middle place in the middle where we do still strive to improve ourselves and improve our lives, but we also strive to accept ourselves as we are. It's kind of like that serenity prayer. It comes back to changing the things that we can change, accepting the things that we can't change, and knowing the difference between the two. And so it all comes back to balance, finding that right balance between improving ourselves and improving our lives, and accepting ourselves and accepting our lives the way they are.